Welcome, viewers, back to the Preaching Humanist with David Oliverio. That's his eye. Let's continue with belief versus knowledge. Today, I'm just going to talk about some examples, talks and dialogue I have when I go into Sunday school classes or even Sunday or Saturday churches. I've been going into some Seventh-day Adventist churches on Saturday mornings with a few of my friends and having some great dialogue and exercising the Socratic method, which is very, very hard for me, being a former preacher and evangelist. So learning how to just ask hard, critical questions, getting people to think. Last week, my friend and I attended a Bible study at a local restaurant with a few Christians. I talked to the gentleman on the phone, told him very, very openly that I was not a Christian. I never said the A word, the atheist word, but I did tell him that I was a skeptic and I like to know what people think, what they believe, and how do they know what they're saying is true, right? So on the phone, he said, "Oh, you're welcome. Please come to the Bible study." So my friend and I went to this particular restaurant last Saturday morning, and we sat with one individual. The Bible teacher was the only one there. None of the other people from his church attended, so it was just myself and my friend alone with this particular Christian. So we got into some good talk, and I immediately just began to use the Socratic method on him, asking him hard questions and having him ask himself these questions and how he knows this is true. So we're going to keep on the topic of belief versus knowledge. How do you know what you're saying is true? By making propositions. These are not relativism. We're talking about a proposition must be true or false. How do you know your claims are true? How can you prove to me, a skeptic, my dear Christian friends, that what you're saying is true? So I went along with this nice gentleman as we ate a meal together at the restaurant, and I began to ask him why he finds religion appealing to him, why he finds Christianity appealing, and how he knows what he's saying is true. So he began with his claims, like most Christians say, "Well, David, when God made us in his image," I had to stop and say to him, "You know, again, you're making a claim and you are believing something." And again, there's a big difference of belief and knowledge. I asked him the simple question, how do you know that God made you and I in his image? How do you know it was your particular God, your particular religion? How do you even know any of this? How can you prove this to me? And the only answers I get from Christians all the time is one of two things. It's, number one, "Well, David, it's in the Bible. The Bible is God's word. I believe it. It says it in the Bible. It must be true." He went on to say other claims. He began to talk about Jesus was raised from the dead. Jesus was risen. And if there be no resurrection, his faith is in vain, the Bible says. So I asked him again, you just made a claim, a proposition. Jesus was raised from the dead. How do you know? Were you there 2,000 years ago? No. Do you have video? Do you have any kind of evidence to show me? Are people raised from the dead today? I ask Christians this all the time. Have you seen somebody raised from the dead? Have you seen limbs grow upon an amputee? No. Have you seen anybody miraculously healed? Have you seen limbs grow, arms grow? Have you seen any miracle? No. Well, then how do you know what you're saying is true? I went on to talk to this wonderful person, this really friendly man, who was desperately trying to explain to me that what he believes is true, and that it's truly knowledge. Well, I asked him more. I asked him about the concept of heaven and hell. How do you know there's a heaven? And how do you know there's a hell? The answer I get from him and every other believer I've been talking to for over 20 years now, thousands of people, comes right down to this. I believe it's true because it's in the Bible. Number one. And number two, I believe it's true because it's a faith thing. I trust it's true. I believe it's true. It's having faith in what God said in the Bible is true. And that gets circular reasoning, circular argumentation, around and around and around we go. How do you know there's a heaven? Well, it says it in John chapter 14. I've had that before. There's a mansion for me in heaven, Jesus said, so I believe it to be true. How do you know? You don't. How do you know there's a hell? And my favorite question I ask Christians all the time, is the concept of hell moral to you? You can't prove there's a heaven or a hell. And can you please explain to me how torture and hell, fire for unbelievers is moral in your mind? These are very hard questions for believers. About a month ago, I went to a Church of Christ church Sunday school class with a couple of my friends. We had great dialogue in the Sunday school class using the Socratic method. And the Sunday school teacher was a young man, and he was having a hard time with some of our questions. So he told me he would have one of these staff preachers contact us. So a couple days later, I got a call from the assistant pastor who was about 30 to 31 years old, like my two children's age, in their early 30s. And we had some great talk and on the phone for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I got right down to, again, how do you know? Epistemology, right? And I said, how do you know any of this is true? How do you even know there's a God? How do you know there's a heaven? How do you know there's a hell? How can you show me a skeptic and that this is true? Well, he actually was one of the most honest preachers and Christians I've ever talked to. He said, I really don't know for sure. I was very surprised that he said that. He said, I don't know for sure. It's a faith thing. I must trust God that everything he says in the Bible is true. So, of course, he couldn't answer me when I asked him to show me and give me a demonstration of the existence of a God and making his beliefs knowledgeable. Can you really demonstrate it to me? He couldn't do it. He wasn't about to because he knew it was impossible. Even though Jesus said, you will do greater works than I do because I go to my Father. All power is given unto me and I've given you the same power. They still can't do anything. You can't show me anything. So these are beliefs, my dear Christian friends. This is not knowledge. This is just beliefs. We attended, myself and a few of my friends, activists, Sunday morning activists. We attended a new church a few months ago on the east side of Austin. And a group of young Aussies from Australia were commissioned by God. Right. And how do we know that to be true, right? So God told them to come to Austin, Texas, and start a new church, to convert and take the city of Austin for God. Like I've never heard that before. I did that back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s myself. We always believed that God was going to take a city, and we were going to take a city for Jesus, right? Just like the Israelites in Canaan land. We were going to possess the promised land. But at least now we don't go out and kill the inhabitants, right? Like they did in the Old Testament. So these young preachers came from Australia and set up a new church. And they were coming to demonstrate the power of this miracle-working God, right? Been there, done that many years ago. So we attended the church, never really got into the auditorium, but we hung around in the lobby. And there were people that worked for the church with their church badges on. Most of them were very young. I felt like the only grandpa there at 59 years old. Most were 20 and 30-year-olds and some teenagers, a lot of college students. And it was a really hip church, a lot of rock and roll for Jesus stuff, man. And people were rocking and rolling and dancing outside in the lobby, outside the main auditorium, to the music going on in the auditorium, and just praising Jesus. And so I was able to talk to 4 or 5 individuals at a time, individually. and begin to ask them questions, how they know any of this is true, and so forth. So one of the young men I talked to he told me he was about 29 years old. And I said, have you ever seen a miracle? Your preacher's in there talking about signs and wonders, right? Like they did in the Bible in the New Testament. Have you ever seen a miracle? Have you ever seen something supernatural other than the natural world? He goes, no, but my preacher has. I said, okay, what happened? He said, well, he was over preaching in, I think it was India or Indonesia, I don't remember where, somewhere in Southeast Asia a year or two ago. And the claim and proposition he made was his preacher was praying for a young man who had just experienced a third-degree burn. His shoulder and his arm was burned horrifically by fire and gasoline and so forth. And he was in horrific pain. He couldn't afford a doctor. He went to a church service where this particular preacher was preaching. And the preacher called for an altar call for salvation. I remember those days. I used to do that. And for healing. So the young man came to the young preacher and said, I have a third-degree burn. I need healing. So the story goes on that the young preacher laid hands on him, gently, hopefully, so he wouldn't cause the poor young man any more pain. And he did what I used to do. Pray in the name of Jesus. Restore the skin. Heal this man. Show your signs and wonders, O Lord, to unbelievers, and so forth. Well, the young man told me that it was a miracle. And his skin just was healed instantly, just like in the Bible. And I said, wow, really? I said, how do you know this happened? Well, I know because my preacher's not a liar. I said, okay, do you have a video of this? How can you prove this to skeptics? Well, I can't really prove it. I just believe it. The Bible is filled with claims, my dear Christian friends. The Bible is filled with promises, my dear believing friends out there. But you have to demonstrate these claims, and you have to not just believe them, but you must prove them to we who are skeptics. So his answer was, again to me, belief. He didn't know for sure. He believed it to be true. So remember, it doesn't matter how much you believe something to be true, that doesn't make it a truth. It doesn't make it a truism. So let's move along. I was out on one of my long walks about a month ago. And here in Austin, we have Lady Bird Lake. And I like to do the entire 10-mile loop and so forth. So I ran across a couple of preachers on the trail who had a couple of bookcases set up with Christian literature, Bibles, different writings from Christian authors, and books and pamphlets and magazines, trying to promulgate and evangelize, we walking on the trail, right? So these were two older preachers, and I couldn't resist. So I walked over there and began to examine the literature, and they both approached me, and we got talking. So I told them my little testimony and how I used to be a preacher myself and so forth, and how I let go of belief in God over almost 30 years ago, and how I've never been happier, and so forth. My testimony I give believers. So I asked him, I said, how do you know that even God exists? How can you prove it? How do you know, not believe, but knowledge that something's true over just believing it? Well, he began to go on and just quoting the Bible to me. Quoting the Bible is not evidence, my dear Christian friends. You must demonstrate it. So we talked about goodness. We talked about diabolical behavior and evil in the world. So he did say, well, I've got evidence. I said, okay, what do you have? How do you know this to be true, that there is a realm of supernaturalism that exists above and beyond the natural world? I, as a naturalist, see space-time, energy, matter. I know that exists. I know that's what exists. I don't believe it exists. I know that space-time, energy, and matter is right here. We're made of matter. This is reality. Believers go a step further. There's a realm, a supernatural realm they believe exists, but they don't really know. They believe it to be true. So he began to tell me his little story of evidence. He said there's evil in the world because of the fall of Lucifer in the Bible. I think most of you that are fellow atheists remember these Bible stories on how God cast out the angel Lucifer because he rebelled against God with 1/3 of the angels, and they know this to be true. No, they don't. You believe it to be true because it's written in a book written thousands of years ago. You can't demonstrate it. So he began to tell me that because of the fall of Satan, there's evil in the world. And he motioned to me like this. He said, look around, look at all the evil. And I said, okay, let me see. I look around here. I said, I see some friendly people talking over here. I see some loving people over here playing with their children and their dogs. People are happy, having fun out hiking, being together as humans. So I said, maybe, just maybe, let me challenge you. So I told the two preachers, I said, maybe some people are bad or evil, as you would say, because of their environment. Maybe they were born and raised into an environment where there was no moral instruction. Maybe they had parents that didn't care. Maybe their parents were drug addicts or alcoholics, or maybe the children were raised on the street, which happens. It's sad, but it's true. Maybe they were raised by an abusive parent. There are many different ways people come to know about their actions. Some people's actions are cruel, some are selfish, and a lot of it is genetic, and a lot of it is also our culture. So I begin to give him another side of the story, another hypothesis, another reason that there could be evil and bad in the world, other than just his claim that it comes because of the fall of Lucifer. He came right down to saying and telling me, no, I don't know for sure, but it's my faith in God. Is faith an arbiter of truth? Can we depend upon belief to know if something's really true and real? Is your perception become reality? You have to know these things, and you have to put them to the test. The preacher couldn't come up with any evidence for any of these. I continue to discuss these topics with believers. The Socratic method is a very valuable tool of asking believers, how do they know these claims? How do they know the Bible or the Quran or whatever their tenet of faith and book is? How do they know it was written by a God? You don't know. You are depending upon belief. Many of us once had belief in these claims. Many of us thought and believe that our behavior and our morality were all based upon these primitive books. Many of us put these books to the test years ago, and many of us have found out that all these books are books of beliefs and claims. There's no evidence for them. We have progressed, we have gone on, and don't want to be offensive to you believers out there, but yes, we have matured above and beyond these ancient mythologies, all the major religions. There is a way out of these primitive ways of thinking, my dear religious friends. If you would begin to place and put your trust, not blind faith, but trust in reality, and begin to look at data and evidence from experienced, knowledgeable human beings who apply the test of truth and critical thinking to their assertions. Their assertions and hypotheses do become theories, which are explanations of scientifically observed facts. There are things called facts. Not everything is relative. A lot of things are relative, not everything is. We actually know things to be true. And I would tell you right now, I am a very strong atheist. I am not 100% sure there's not a God, but I'm pretty close. I've been on both sides. I don't see any evidence to believe in anything supernatural. And no, I'm not angry. I'm not bitter at my previous lifestyle. I am passionate, and I want to help my fellow human beings to let go of these beliefs and go on to true facts and knowledge and begin to think rather than just believe and have faith in the invisible world that you cannot prove exists. Well, I think I've said enough, and I hope this helps you to begin to question, have doubts, use your mind, begin to think, question everything, study, open up your mind, and be objective in all things. So remember, what you believe to be true does not necessarily make that true. There are things that we know to be true. So there's a big difference in belief and knowledge. Hang on there, my religious friends. Keep thinking and keep studying. Open up your minds. Have a wonderful day. This is David Oliverio, the Preaching Humanist. We'll see you next time.